Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where Dr. Disha Spath will be your companion on this exciting financial adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms.
Welcome back to another episode of Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. I'm your host, Dr. Disha Spath, and today we're diving into the fascinating intersection of healthcare decisions, price transparency, and retirement planning. Too often we think of our health plan or our HSA as just one other thing to check off during open enrollment. But what if we told you it could be a core component of your long-term wealth strategy? Joining me today is Carl Hall CFA. Carl is a wealth advisor for CapTrust. He's based out of Boston and works with individuals and families to manage their financial lives and achieve their unique goals. CapTrust delivers financial planning, portfolio management, investment advice, and concierge family office services. Carl has a longstanding interest in health savings accounts and the interconnectedness between retirement planning, HSAs, and healthcare price transparency. So let's get into it. Carl, how are you doing?
Hey, Disha, great. Great to see you on this lovely Sunday. How was your weekend?
Oh, it was fantastic. It's just been beautiful up here in New York, and Boston's not too far away, so I'm sure you had similarly great weather this weekend.
No complaints for once from Boston, that's for sure. Yeah, we had 2 beautiful days in a row. And how was the DPC conference? I'm curious
Yeah, so
how it went.
it was fantastic. I went down to New Orleans for our listeners for the DPC Summit put on by the AAFP, and it was all the things that I needed to, start my practice. Like everything was so relevant. It's really fun when you go to a conference where you're just like, oh my God, I need to like soak up every single second of this.
Pretty good turnout?
Yeah, absolutely. Great turnout. And, afterwards, my kids came with me, so we enjoyed a little bit of New Orleans too. I love New Orleans jazz, so it was like fantastic. Well, let's dive in here to our conversation today. We're going to be talking about benefits, health costs. And I love how interested you are in it. We actually met through the DPC circles, the DPC groups, and you've taken a lot of interest in that. And I'm really excited to hear your perspective on some of this stuff as a wealth advisor. But first, let's start with the basics. Let's talk about open enrollment. So usually when open enrollment comes around, most people are like, oh, I don't know, whatever, let's just auto renew, or we ignore it, or we just go with the lowest premium plan, with little thought. Why do you think people consistently fail to make the most optimal health plan decisions?
Sure. So it's, there's a lot of different kind of behavioral biases that are going on there. In my opinion, you have choice overload, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which you often see when it comes to 401k, mutual fund selection. People just are often just overwhelmed by the breadth of choices that they have. Default bias is a big one where it's, hey, I'm just going to stick with what I had last year and just kind of ride it out. I think the average amount of time people spend making those, frankly, kind of critical financial decisions is something like 2 minutes, if that. I mean, it's really low.
Yeah.
And there's other heuristics. There's framing biases, and sometimes it's their inability to kind of calculate a risk. It's you talked about the lower premium. In some cases, they'll look at the lower deductible and think that that's a less risky decision when they're actually not really taking into account the differential in the annual premium. Number one, number two, to the extent that there's an HSA option, they're probably not accounting for any kind of employer funding. And then they're certainly not, most likely 9 out of 10 times, they're not accounting for any kind of tax benefit of actually funding an HSA. So, and then frankly, just general unawareness of framing HSAs as a potential retirement account too. So there's a lot of different parties that I think kind of that hold that responsibility. But I mean, I think those three are the best way to describe it or summarize it.
Actually, I was thinking about my audience as you were talking about that, and I'd like to think that my audience is probably better at making that decision because we go gung-ho on this topic. But let's remind everyone why these decisions are really important. And can you explain, most doctors know what premiums and deductibles are, but just summarize for us just quickly what these things mean.
So the premium is just the amount you're going to pay to have that coverage. And, in an employer setting, it's going to be split between you and your employer. I think roughly the split is generally 70% your employer, 30% the employee.
Mm-hmm.
The deductible is just the amount that you have to pay out of pocket until you actually get the insurance component to kick in. And so that'll vary based on the type of healthcare plan that you enroll in. And then the co-insurance is a portion that once you hit that deductible and you're actually, you hit the insurance level, the co-insurance will be a percentage of incremental expense that will be out of pocket as a consumer. And then the other one is the max out of pocket, which it will also vary based on the plan.
So, how do you, as a consumer of these products, how do you go through and analyze this for yourself when you're making these decisions?
Ideally, or how do most people do it currently?
How do you do it?
Well, I mean, this is just based on some experience and frankly, learning from a lot of other people. But I think the first thing that should be said is, well, first of all, is in HSA, an HSA isn't necessarily for everyone. Okay. So there are use cases out there where it's not an appropriate case.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best example of that is even if it's a more expensive healthcare plan, there's a very large percentage of this country that unfortunately live paycheck to paycheck. So in that sense, they may not have a $2,000 in savings to make up for that differential in relative deductible between the lower deductible plan and the higher deductible plan. So, in that case, an HSA may not be kind of in play because they just simply can't, they don't have the liquidity to cover that difference in the deductible. But in terms of how I think people should approach it is, number one, that people should realize that an HSA is not an FSA, okay, which is a flexible spending account or flexible spending arrangement, I think is technically what the IRS calls it. And the HSA are monies that you keep, you can hold on to. And once you fund that HSA, you can use it to either cover, that deductible, the out-of-pocket exposure, or in some cases you can, if you have enough or depending on your outside sources of income, you can actually invest your HSA money sooner than later. So in that sense, it becomes a specialized retirement account, and which is relevant and important because the number one fear of people reaching retirement is the ability to afford healthcare costs in retirement.
Yeah, I mean, HSAs are so powerful in that, they don't get taxed when you put the money in, the growth doesn't get taxed, and then the withdrawals don't get taxed. I mean, it's completely tax-free as long as it's used for
Right.
healthcare. And, but in your practice as a financial advisor, do you find that people are as excited about HSAs as we are?
I certainly feel that once you spend 5 minutes and you talk to them about it, either they're just trying to make me feel good or they actually are genuinely excited. And I think most of the time it truly is this borderline eureka moment where they're like, really? Like it's either you can invest that or they're just surprised by the tax benefit, depending on the scenario. And absolutely, I am of the opinion that there's a thirst for more knowledge out there. And selfishly, as an advisor, that's one of the things I look to try to differentiate my own practice with is trying to add value on that front. I think historically, a lot of advisors maybe kind of ignored it because maybe the non-fiduciaries out there. I mean, we're fiduciaries at CapTrust, so it's the HSA discussion is very, very much part of the integrated planning discussion. So it's going to come up at some point. But I think historically, the brokers out there, they kind of like the cynical response I heard going back even 5-10 years ago was, "Oh, there's not enough money in it for me, for the advisor to make money managing the HSA assets." Whereas I personally feel like, hey, it's a great way to add value for your clients. And if you can add value for your clients, then it can't be a bad thing for you in the long run. So, yeah.
So how would an advisor make money off of managing an HSA, or do they at
Well,
all?
I mean, it could be asset based, right? Depending on what their account minimum is. It could, if you have, Some people do have HSAs of $50,000, $100,000. I think more often than not, in a fiduciary context, it'll just be part of the service that's kind of wrapped into an overall holistic financial planning engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And, it could be a one-off planning, a specialized planning consultation potentially. I mean, I haven't really seen that much thus far, but I feel like that there is potential for that, especially when you're able to quantify the savings and the value to the consumer. And, both frankly, in the short run and the long run. There's a year one savings, and then if you stack up all those tax benefits year over year, and you start to frame that HSA as a retirement account, you can really see where it actually really does add up over time.
Do you find that people actually use their HSA for their healthcare expenses ever, or do they just let it grow?
It's a mixed bag. I think there's really two scenarios there. Well, let's frame it as two ideal use cases where an investment HSA makes a ton of sense, and it could be for a wide variety of the population, but the two kind of slam dunks, as I like to say, are someone who's making a very large income. So they're already in the marginal, 37% marginal rate, where they're pulling down $600,000-$700,000 a year. They've already maxed out their 401k, and they're really looking for other ways to save in a really tax advantaged manner. If they happen to also be healthy, it becomes even more of a no-brainer. So the move there would be, you fund the HSA up to the max every year, you invest it. To the extent you have any out-of-pocket costs, a lot of people don't even realize that you can actually hold on to your proof of care, and then reimburse yourself from that HSA at any point in the future. So it's they call that the shoeboxing approach, and I like to talk to folks about that, where you have a couple $100 dental visit or something like that, and you prefer to keep your HSA monies invested. You can always reimburse yourself in the future. The other opportunity that I think is really underappreciated are the younger folks out there, people right out of college who rarely go to the doctor, and the ones that are smart and are saving into a 401k. You spend 5 or 10 minutes with the younger generation. I'd say 25 to 35 years of age, could be even 23, 24. And it's just unbelievable when you actually do the math, where if they were to max out their HSA, if they did that for 5 or 10 years and stopped doing it, and kept that invested, their retirement readiness as it relates to that that future healthcare liability is in incredible shape. So those are the real two great use cases: the younger folks, and then the folks who are earning a ton of money. And then there's obviously the edge cases in between, where people are making good money. They go to the doctor for their annual visit, which is generally covered under the Affordable Care Act. They may have, some frictional out-of-pocket costs. You got kids, kid sprains their leg or whatever like that, and you end up in the ER, or hopefully a DPC practitioner going forward. And we'll talk about that. But it's a trend that's growing. I will say that people are starting to catch on. If you look at the mix if you look at the overall HSA pie between the total dollars kind of in the ecosystem, and it's broken out basically by deposits or cash, which are that portion that's not invested, and then the investment portion. It was only about a year or two ago when the investment portion actually overtook the deposit balance of the overall HSA pie. And I think the overall HSA pie is around 150 billion now.
Wow.
What's really interesting, though, is only 10% of the HSA owners are investing. So
What?
you have a relatively small percentage of the HSA owners that have kind of caught on to this, and they've caught on, and it's growing, and they appreciate that tax benefit.
Yeah. Actually, now that you say that, I can see that, because the whole actually investing the HSA funds is an additional step that's not really told to you anywhere. When you sign up with your employer, they just say, okay, you sign up for HSA, and then the money starts going into the HSA, but you actually have to go log in and then pick the investments, right, and choose to invest the money, it doesn't automatically start investing it.
No, and I think you actually hit on a really important point where I think the tech stack historically in the HSA space has been, not great, right? And the other interesting thing too is in terms of why did it take so long for people to kind of catch on to the HSA investment opportunity? I think part of it has to do with the fact that the legacy HSA providers, especially in the first 10 to 15 years, really, and they've only been around for about 20 years. A lot of these HSA providers, actually, their business model have been bank based, meaning that they actually want to keep those HSAs as core tier one deposits so they can lend against it. So, in some cases, there was actually almost a disincentive to educate the HSA owners around that investment opportunity. Now, I'm not saying that's the case across the board, but Fidelity, I think, is actually a great example of, number one, an HSA provider that's extremely technology forward. It's a very good product from a technology perspective. And, Fidelity is obviously they're an investment shop. So they kind of led with that investment HSA opportunity early on. And at some point, they're going to overtake the number one HSA player for that very reason. I have no question. I have no doubt in my mind about that. So, it's taken some time to get the word out.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the different providers and the fees that they charge for HSAs?
I mean, sometimes there's the fee. The business model of HSA providers it's kind of a three-legged stool. There's the interchange revenue that they get through when someone swipes the card. They'll get a cut on that. There is, like I said, that net interest margin or the loan spread on the deposits, on the HSA deposits, and then the annual fee, or the monthly administrative fee as well. I mean, those three largely comprise the bulk of HSA provider revenue. And it's been a pretty competitive space. I think the larger players out there, like the Fidelities, have really been forcing a lot of the other legacy large providers to, I think, over the years, reduce their administrative fees, which obviously is good for the end consumer.
Yeah. Just to clarify, you previously mentioned FSAs. What's the difference, just for our audience, between HSAs and FSAs? How are FSAs different?
Yeah, so the FSA it's think of it almost as like employer owned.
Yeah.
It's more like an insurance product where that's very often that you have to use it or lose it. So you elect to squirrel away $1,000, $2,000 a year for the FSA, and then if you don't use it by the end of the year, or maybe the following April 15th, then you lose the ability to spend it. It just goes away. So it's considered more like an insurance based product, whereas the HSA, the HSA is straight up a financial account. Okay. And it's tricky, and it is so much alphabet soup in this space. And that's one of the reasons why people get so confused by this one, which is why I think advisors can really help kind of their clients navigate this complete maze. The HSA is an investment account, and the one requirement to have an HSA is you have to be enrolled in a qualified high deductible healthcare plan.
Right.
So,
and no other coverage.
Yeah, no other coverage. And if you want to have an FSA, it has to be a specialized FSA, right? I mean, it's complicated, but again, I think as advisors, it's a great opportunity to add some incremental value and to build a little bit of a specialty when it comes to that specific topic. Because once you actually, I mean, it's certainly not rocket science. It's really just terminology and understanding kind of how it all plays and fits together.
Yeah.
But the FSA is, there's tax advantages to that, but I always joke that you never want to spend out of your HSA in December on sunblock because you're not going to lose it, right? Whereas the FSA, that's historically what people do is they panic shop at the end because they got to blow through their balance and make sure it doesn't go to waste. But don't do that with your HSA dollars unless you have to.
So I mean, HSA sounds great, but is the FSA like the thing you recommend for anyone?
I mean, I think an FSA would be appropriate if, for whatever reason, a high deductible plan isn't a great fit for someone. Then, I mean, certainly this is a lot of value in taking advantage of that tax break of funding that FSA. And especially if you know you're going to have upcoming expenses in that coming year, right? I
Yeah.
mean, whether it's a surgery or something else that's going on, I just would encourage people not to overfund it necessarily, because
Yeah. Because
a
you lose
pretty
it.
large percentage of that FSA assets do go away, or they go back to the employer at the end of the year.
So I'm gonna ask you a very selfish question here. My husband, who carries our benefits, just changed employers, and they have a high deductible insurance plan available, but they don't give the option to enroll in an HSA. The only option was an FSA. So if your employer sponsored plan or your employer is not offering an HSA, can you sign up? Can I sign up for an HSA by myself?
Yeah, and as long as you're enrolled in a qualified high deductible plan, you could certainly fund your own HSA.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay.
And again, if you just be careful with the FSA, because
Right.
you want to make sure if you do that as well, it's a special purpose, and that special purpose just refers to the fact that you can use it for I think dental and vision.
I
It's more of a narrow use case for the specialized FSA.
Right. Or like a dependent care FSA. We use those sometimes with the HSA where we just pay for the
Yeah,
kids'
right. Yep.
care through that.
Another good example there for sure. But no, you could go to one of the providers that offer individual HSAs and fund your own. I think the only disadvantage of that is when you fund an HSA through payroll,
Mm-hmm.
which is why it would be nice if they did have an HSA as attached to his healthcare plan. Here's a little fact that a lot of people don't realize is that when you fund an HSA through payroll, it actually avoids that 7.65% FICA tax,
Mm-hmm.
unlike a 401k dollar that goes in. So, right out of the gate, you're already almost 8% ahead of the game
Wow.
relative to a 401k dollar.
Hmm. So if you don't fund it through payroll, then you do pay that FICA tax, I guess, and then
No, you won't pay the FICA tax. It's just that you'll be able to deduct that contribution on your tax, but you won't get it. You won't be able to take advantage of that 7.65% savings.
got it. All right. Well, that's good to know. Now, you mentioned DPCs, and you mentioned the qualification of being able to contribute to an HSA is that you need to have a high deductible health plan and no other insurance coverage. So let's talk about what just changed in the DPC world.
Yeah, I mean, so as you mentioned at the top, we met just on one of the DPC community ecosystems, and the DPC model is a model that I've been following very tangentially, like probably for a good 10 years. And for a lot of reasons, I won't bore you, but there are a lot of things about the healthcare system that I feel like are really broken.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the DPC model, it just seems like it's the way healthcare should be, especially primary care.
Yeah.
And I love any DPC physician who just takes the plunge, because he or she is likely to they're just fed up with the system, right? And they're doing something about it. Really, that's what I really love the most about it, is they're doing something about it, and they're trying to be part of the solution as opposed to just complaining about the status quo.
Right.
And listen, there is so much waste in healthcare. There's so much opportunity that I have to believe that if you're a thoughtful physician with an entrepreneurial spirit and the desire and willingness to go out and slog it out for a couple of years to grow at that baseline practice, I got to believe the sky's the limit. From a financial perspective in the long run, and
Mm-hmm.
then in the short run and in the long run, I think for the consumer, it's just a really appealing opportunity. I got a text, a really kind of timely text from a friend last night who's self-employed. His wife is too, and they got kids. They got twin 6-year-olds,
Hmm.
and it was kind of funny because out of nowhere he just started complaining about healthcare, and he's paying $20,000 a year for health insurance, and
Wow.
neither his wife's nor their kids' primary were even in network. Okay,
Oh no.
so and you can imagine me, like, I get the text and I'm like, have you heard of DPC? Right. And then, poor guy, he probably wasn't expecting me to blow him up on text with the tax advantages of funding an HSA, going DPC. I even went on to the DPC website to try to find something close to him. But I will say, in my defense, I sat down this morning and I did some math, and if they're paying 20 grand a year for craptastic coverage, and they were to, this is, hypothetically, if they were to identify a great local DPC physician that could serve the whole family, I think it was like $325 a month. You do the math, and he's in a position where they could fully fund the family HSA to 8550, and I just assumed maybe a 22% marginal rate and maybe 20. I can't remember exactly what it was, but at the end of the day, it's like a 41% savings with a better outcome. I'm talking on the healthcare side, 41% savings with access to DPC. Assuming that they like their physician and all that. Now, if you look at the financial outcome in the short run, obviously 41% savings on a base of 20 grand is a big number. But if you stack that up year over year and you assume maybe a 5% investment return, I think over a 10-year period, it's, assuming that the primary utilization of your HSA is really just through that DPC, or, depending on if they could just pay that DPC out of pocket, right? So by the way, for the audience sake, DPC, when physicians are talking to their patients and clients about the HSA, they don't have to pay it out of the HSA. They can pay it out of the HSA now, but if they don't, they can always reimburse themselves from that HSA in the future. So, just as an aside, but it's just incredible to think of the power of that. And that's just one real life hypothetical example that I just shared from a text from last night, where it's like the good news is things are so broken that the numbers can get pretty big pretty quick without having to be. And it was a bronze plan, by the way. I went on to the Mass Exchange, and interestingly enough, even like the bronze plan with, it was maybe a $7,500 deductible. It's still going to run you like 13 grand, which I still think is ridiculous. But the good news is at least now the bronze plans are HSA eligible. So the discussion, let's just say in theory, like we were talking about that, is, I obviously don't give medical advice, but I can talk about the kind of the ins and outs around health insurance and what the potential options are.
Right.
Imagine having a primary care physician where he or she can see the whole family. I think in some cases you have multiple physicians at the same practice where, this male, they're female practitioners, and and the subscription-based model, from a business perspective, is a phenomenal business model for the physicians.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going on about this. You want to jump in and say something here? Or?
No. I love the thought process there. So you're telling me that, yes, you're getting pretty expensive coverage through the bronze coverage. Still, unfortunately, that is the lowest level of the ACA plans, or the lowest covering, I guess, and lowest cost. But with this new bill and the changes that have just been made, now you can pair that with an HSA, and now we can use that for our DPC fees. And now we're really talking about cost savings, like huge cost savings, and we're talking about investment growth, right? And potentially being able to put away those HSA funds for later and still use your DPC receipts to claim those funds later on down the line if you need to.
Right. Now, so in his case, my feedback to him would be, all right, so you do the bronze plan, make sure you're comfortable with that deductible. Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, his first move would be are you interested in direct primary care, which I'm pretty sure that anyone with a brain would be today, right? Right. Given where we are with healthcare.
Yeah.
Try to identify, because, we need more of you, Disha. We need like 200,000 of you, not whatever the number is, 2,000 or 3,000. Hopefully we'll get there soon. Try to find a local DPC provider, practitioner, interview them, make sure you're comfortable with it. And then, compare the relative deductibles of the bronze versus the silver or gold plan. And then obviously also study the network too of whatever plan it is that you're assessing, to ensure that any other specialist providers are in that network as well. And then, so then if they're comfortable, if it all checks out, then I think in that particular example, he would probably look to max out the HSA contribution and invest, and then pay the DPC out of pocket, hold on to the receipt, be able to verify that those expenditures. So at some point you can reimburse yourself, and start out with 8550, and then you 8550 to a lot of people, it may not seem like a huge dollar amount, but it adds up, right? And especially when healthcare is only it's a large percentage, but it's not all of your spending in retirement, right? So,
Right.
again, as an advisor, it's just a great way to add value, and I think a relatively unique way. But but at the same time, it's very similar to any other financial planning type of problem you're trying to solve, where you have certain assumptions, you've got inflows, you've got outflows, you've got tax rates, right? You've got other considerations, and it's not like advisors need to get into becoming healthcare professionals by any stretch. It's really just about, hey, did you know about this? Did you know about that?
Right.
And not a lot of people know about this stuff around HSA. So
Exactly. And I see my role in this space and like financial education space is similar to that. Like I'm not trying to give anyone financial advice by any means, but it's kind of like, did you know, right? Did you know about
yeah,
this? Like, let's like expose you to this idea that you may not have heard about. And it's not health advice if you tell people to look into DPC, and it's not financial advice if I tell people to look into HSAs. It's just education, right?
yeah, no, and it's really valuable education, I think, too, and it's the type of education I really feel that, and I'm probably biased just because I just had such an interest in this topic, kind of at the societal level, but people are starving for this kind of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's confusing. And like we talked about at the very beginning of the call, they just default to the status quo, and that's a behavioral bias that unfortunately costs them thousands of dollars a year. And then
Yeah.
hopefully at some point that someone will kind of bring it to their attention.
Let's switch gears now and talk about price transparency. This is something
Mm.
else that you're very passionate about. We've talked about this a lot. And it resonates with me deeply as a DPC physician. So, can you explain the connection you see between healthcare price transparency and long term retirement security?
Yeah. So, in my case, I came at this topic in a very, very unique way, I guess you could say. Probably about 12 years ago, I started this kind of messing around with data science, and I open source software, and I got access to a bunch of claims data. It actually started before. So basically, it started with this kind of hypothesis. Okay, well, you have HSAs, right? And this is again 10 or 12 years ago. They're, without a doubt, even back then, the tax laws haven't changed that much as it relates to HSAs. They're the most tax advantaged retirement dollar you can get. So, to me, it then became a question around, because going back even 20 years, people were yakking about the lack of price transparency in healthcare, and so it seemed like a major disconnect to me. Where, how
Hmm.
could you have such an incredibly powerful retirement savings vehicle in a space where there's virtually zero transparency around how much you're going to pay for something? So, in my infinite wisdom, I went down a rabbit hole I still yet to emerge from, because the state of New Hampshire has this incredible law that they passed a while ago, where um, you can get access to the public data file of their all payer claims database program. So it's all de-identified data,
Hmm.
and yeah, I'm really showing my weirdness here, but so I decided to apply to get access to that public claims file, and it's like a terabyte of data, right? I mean, it's just a ton of healthcare data. So I was really, because again, I wanted to teach myself a little bit about open source software and coding and data science, and so I decided to get access to this. And they send you, by the way, like a little memory stick.
Wow.
They would mail it to me. Right now, it's just like done electronically, or it's online or web based. But back then, I would, every 4 months, I would get this little data stick. So it was
Wow.
so cool. And and it took me like 3 months to even figure out how to like operate R, the open source software environment, and then I proceeded to ask probably 1,000 annoying questions of the data provider, and because I was really determined just to kind of dig into the data to see if my hypothesis was correct around like the transparency. Because, the hypothesis going into it was, oh, there's probably like because, I'm an investment data guy as a background. I mean, I love data. I love portfolio optimization, portfolio management, like geeky kind of quantitative stuff. So I was basically like, it's going to be interesting to see what this looks like, what this data looks like. And, I dug into it and I was just like, oh, this is interesting. Okay.
So what was your hypothesis?
Well, I mean, we've talked about the radiology examples before where I would hone in on over time. This literally took me well over a couple of years to even figure out how to manage the data. Okay. Because I'm, at least I'm persistent. I may not be a genius, but I'm persistent, and I stick with it. But over time, I started to isolate those types of healthcare services that had a high variability. Number one, a high out-of-pocket cost, however you want to define it, over $100 per claim episode or whatever, and then also a high variability. And so when you isolate it that way, there's a couple of categories that really stood out. One of which was radiology. Okay, so I mean, literally, like if you had an MRI of the lower back. I mean, I can't remember the exact data points, but directionally, it's going to be accurate. You could spend either $820 on an MRI, or you could spend $4,200 at the hospital up the street.
Yes.
All right. So, to a struggling person who's trying to save their HSA responsibly, and they could do that for 5 years and get wiped out by one interaction with the healthcare system.
Yes.
Because for whatever reason, their primary care physician who, by the way, may have been acquired by a hospital system. I wonder why. Because, you need an MRI, go see, the radiologist down the hall in the hospital setting. As you know, Disha, as a hospital care is a lot more expensive because they have that, the facility fee and all that.
Fees. Yes. Yeah. It's
So
a travesty.
You look at so in that one instance, you're talking about a $3,200 delta.
Yeah.
And so tying it back to your question around what does that have to do with HSA as well, let's say if you were to actually engage in some price transparency tools, and it doesn't mean you don't get the MRI or the CAT scan, by the way, you can still get it, just be a little bit thoughtful about it. And, if you were to do 5 or 10 minutes of digging and call the insurance company and see if there's a lower cost option. And so let's say hypothetically you save $3,000 by doing that, and that's $3,000 that can stay in your HSA and remain invested. And, you compound that at 5% for 20 years, and you're talking that one decision to shop that one service can be a future value well into the 5 digits, right? So,
yeah.
And that's interesting. And that's interesting on a lot of levels. It's still very interesting to me. And I know this isn't the scope of the call, but it's very interesting as it relates to the fiduciary obligation in healthcare plans.
Yes. And I also think, like, as the Hippocratic Oath, I mean, we need to do the best by our patients. I think in the doctor's realm, too, it's our responsibility to help the patient price shop some of these things. And a lot of doctors just sort of say, because I have no idea who's doing my billing in a big institution like a hospital. I don't know what kind of bill you're going to get because I have no idea what insurance you have. And the codes that I put in will run through your insurance. Our people bill a certain amount that I have no idea about. And then the insurance and our people have some sort of a deal agreed upon price on this one code. They'll get the payment, then there'll be a cost share to you. And there's like so many middlemen that it is literally impossible to find out what the stuff I'm ordering for you is going to cost you in the hospital setting. But as primary care docs, when we order imaging tests, we can tell our people to go to different facilities, especially in DPC when we're not really associated with a specific health system. And in that case, we really can help people price shop some of these tests that we're ordering. And there are open source information databases out there. I found the Healthcare Blue Book to be really good for that. I think Aminos is another one I've used in the past, and I can link to those in the show notes of this episode too, where your patient can go in and just search the providers in their area, put in their insurance information, and get estimated out of pocket or estimated costs. And that's huge.
It's so huge, and I really feel, and I'm going to be really interested to see whether or not this theory is correct, but I think that one of the things that people are missing is the ability for DPC providers like yourself to really, to your point, to help control those downstream costs, right? It
Yes.
doesn't mean that you have to necessarily tell them exactly where to go. You know more about that than I do, of course, but I tell you, if you can be a gatekeeper, really what you're doing is you're mitigating the financial risk for your clients in terms of, blowing through more of that deductible, right?
Yeah.
And I would love, hopefully at some point, the TPC community will be able to quantify the value of that downstream cost containment value, because it's huge. I don't know what the number is, but it's big, right? I mean, obviously it's better care, and you're not going to get upcoded. You're not going to get, you're not going to spend 5 minutes with your primary care physician during your annual physical and then get charged for a 45-minute visit, right? And you're actually
Mm-hmm.
going to get the care you need, but really you become, I like to, it's very similar to like the fiduciary. It's like your interests are aligned, just like investment fiduciaries interests are aligned with their clients, as
Right.
opposed to a commission based structure. You as a TPC provider, your interests are really aligned with your patient's interest, right? And they're just, and needless to say, the amount of bureaucracy you cut out of the equation is also staggering. So very excited to see if the DPC providers, and at the end of the day, by the way, Disha, like most people have access. Here's a crazy thing: is a few years ago, I can't remember what year it was, but there are actually price transparency laws on the book today that require insurance companies to provide access to cost comparison tools.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, I don't know what the utilization rate is of that access, but it's not very high.
Yeah. Most
So
people have
if
no
at the
idea.
very least, if the average DPC doc can just say, hey, I think you should get an MRI or a CAT scan, and he or she may have a couple of ideas of local providers that they trust, and they may or may not know what the cost would be. But at the very least, if they can say, you might want to log into your health insurance website and see if you have access to any of these price transparency tools, and chances are they're probably going to already have access to those tools. So I don't think the health insurance companies are going to be advertising, that those tools exist, but they're out there, and I would encourage anyone to check it out and to certainly engage in price discovery as it relates to healthcare.
Yes, yes, huge point. Yeah, you have to ask the question. People aren't gonna help you through it, but your DPC doc might,
Yeah,
because your
truly.
DPC doc
Yeah.
has more time with you. They might be able to sit down and run the costs comparisons with you. But if you don't have that, then you can still sit down and do it yourself if you reach out to your insurance company, or just Google healthcare price transparency, and you'll come up with several websites that have this information out there for free. So let's zoom out a little bit and come out to the macro lens. What do you think could actually move the needle on bending the healthcare cost curve in this country? Like, are we missing something big, or do we need 1,000 small shifts?
Well, I mean, I think more awareness around the value of price transparency tools is certainly important. But as you know, and everyone knows, that there's a lot going on in technology right now.
Hmm.
Things are moving really fast with AI, and I think that, this is not my domain necessarily, but the biggest payers of healthcare in this country are large companies, large self-funded corporations. So I think that once these large companies really start to kind of harness their data and really take a really close look at it, benchmark it, compare it, slice it and dice it, in what you're going to be able to do with AI and that computing power, it's going to be incredible to see what comes out of that. Right now, you can make a lot of different assumptions, but I have to believe that if there's going to be disruption in healthcare, it's going to be a function of an entity getting their hands on that de-identified self-funded claims data in really solving for how to reduce costs. And I don't know, what the mechanism is to get them there to the point. I mean, whether it's, who knows if litigation is going to pick up? I don't know, but it's going to get interesting pretty quick.
Well, Carl, we've had some really interesting conversation. Let's end with a lighthearted segment that we like to call Carl's Financial Curveballs.
Oh boy, here we go.
Sunday
night,
out. That's
Come on, I
terrible.
don't need any curveballs. I got enough curveballs in my life as it is. All right. So, all right, go ahead.
I had ChatGPT write it.
Oh, really? That's awesome. Okay.
And that's what I came up with. So there we go, AI.
I should probably put in the question so I can spit out the answers for me on my ChatGPT.
It probably already has that ready for you for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So Carl, HSA or Roth IRA, if you could pick only one for the next 10 years, which would be?
Well, I mean, both. No, I mean, the Roth is amazing, but the HSA all day long, just because it's tax perfect, right? Without a doubt. And by the way, you don't want to have too large of an HSA. Like, you don't want to die with $1 million HSA. This one last little parting factoid about HSAs is there's an optimal size. Okay. So you don't want to have $1 million because it's taxable to the estate. So, so the answer to that is HSA. And then, for a 25-year-old, he or she may want to save for only 10 or 15 years and then at least taper it off a little bit because you don't want that to dominate the overall retirement picture. And then from a funding perspective, by the way, in a workplace setting, you always want to fund your 401k up to the company match, right? So that's something I forgot to mention. But
sure.
So the funding sequence is up to the match, HSA, then maybe Roth 401k. But HSA all day.
If you could require every American to read one book on money, what would it be?
I mean, it'd probably be like The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, which is, I'm a bit of a Warren Buffett guy. So
yeah, that's a dense book, but I like it.
But it's a very dense book. But there was also another one. I read it 10 or 15 years ago, but it was I don't know if it was The Millionaire Next Door or something like that. But
yeah.
Talked about the average barber who got really rich just by really good savings habits and stuff. And
right.
Can't remember, but yeah, I mean, Intelligent Investor. But it's pretty dense. It's sorry.
I tried to read that at the beach, and I was like, "Whoa, I need to take notes."
Yeah, you may want to ask ChatGPT for the cliff notes on that one.
Yeah, no, I like The Millionaire Next Door too. That's a good one.
Yeah,
I think it's just like a mindset and opening people's eyes up to the possibility that they don't have to be born into riches to be financially stable. Just early investing and steady investing is all it takes.
Yeah, it's time in the market, not timing the market, right?
Exactly.
It's start early, it's I try to talk to my kids about that and the whole power of compound interest and all that. It's they're still relatively young. It's in one ear and out the other, but I'm gonna keep trying, Disha.
I like it. Keep fighting the good fight. They'll, once they hear it enough, they'll get it because it takes a little while for kids to realize the importance of money. But once they do, I think they're just like, oh, okay, and they're already 20 steps ahead of people whose parents don't know this information, right? And even if they rebel against it now, they might remember it when they're 25 and be like, oh yeah, my dad said something about that, and maybe I should.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah, no question about it.
Carl, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a new perspective on our healthcare choices and how they can literally shape our financial future. If you found today's episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with a friend who's still on that overpriced PPO plan. And remember, financial freedom isn't about how much you make. It's about how you align your money with your values.
Thanks so much, Dish. It was great to spend some time with you tonight, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and all your wisdom. Thanks for listening to Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. I'm Dr. Disha Spath. Until next time, stay frugal, y'all.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.